In the vast silence of space, the engineers of the Galactic Council prided themselves on one thing above all else: absolute precision. Systems, protocols, and fail-safes, all tuned to perfection. Failure, it was mathematically impossible. But today, something had gone terribly wrong. The emergency alarms echoed throughout the station. Glowing hazard symbols blared from every display, and the engineering team, frantic and exhausted, had tried everything. That's when the humans were called in, an act of sheer desperation. If protocol had worked, it would have, but it hadn't. And now all hope rested on a single disheveled Earth engineer who strolled into the chaos, clutching a cup of coffee, a roll of duct tape, and a look that said, "What's the problem?" The Galactic Council prided itself on perfect engineering. Every station, every ship, every bolt, everything designed by the finest minds in the galaxy, functioning with the flawless precision of a symphony. And yet, aboard the remote maintenance station Zaltara, the alarms blared a terrible truth. The symphony was off-key. A reactor coolant leak had triggered cascading failures across every major system. Power flickered. Air filters were overwhelmed. Entire decks were at risk of decompression. Engineers scrambled, deploying emergency protocols that should have contained the crisis in minutes. But protocols failed. For the first time in recorded memory, they had no idea what to do next. Captain Vorak paced furiously on the command deck, his claws clacking against the metal floor. This shouldn't be possible," he hissed. His third eye twitched, a sure sign that his stress gland was overactive. Gralvan, the head systems engineer, frantically typed commands into the control panel. "I don't understand. Every backup system is malfunctioning. The coolant lines are locked. The reactor is, oh no, temperature rising by 3 degrees per second." A murmur of dread spread among the crew. No one dared say what they all knew. The station had hours, maybe minutes, before the reactor would overload. "The problem is getting worse the more we follow protocols," Gralvan stammered. "Nothing is working." Vorak slammed a fist on the console. "There has to be a solution. Contact the Central Council. Summon a High Council engineer." A junior officer, pale and trembling, spoke up. "Captain, all advanced specialists are light years away. The nearest qualified expert won't arrive for 2 standard weeks." Vorak's eyes darkened with horror. "We don't have 2 weeks." That's when Gralvan hesitated, glancing nervously at the screen. "There is one alternative, Captain." Vorak fixed him with a piercing stare. "What alternative?" Gralvan took a deep breath. "There's a human engineer stationed at Outpost 16 nearby." The room fell into stunned silence. No one spoke. No one dared breathe. "A human?" Captain Vorak looked around the room, antennae twitching nervously. "We cannot possibly rely on a human. They don't follow protocols. They improvise." Another officer chimed in, voice low and wary. "I heard humans once used a beverage called coffee to power a satellite for 3 years." Gralvan shook his head. "That can't be true." "Oh, it's true," whispered the junior officer, eyes wide. "And they use something called duct tape to repair quantum machinery." A collective shudder ran through the crew. "They are dangerous," Vorak whispered. "Unpredictable." Gralvan leaned closer, voice filled with dread. "But they get results." With a heavy sigh, Vorak made the call. "Summon the human. Tell him we're out of options." The docking bay doors creaked open, and the crew huddled nervously at the far end, watching as the human engineer arrived. The heavy boots of Jacob Carter, Earth's only available maintenance tech in the sector, clanged on the deck plates. He was unshaven, bleary-eyed, and holding a half-finished cup of coffee like it was life support. "Morning," Jacob muttered, wiping sleep from his eyes. "You said something about a reactor meltdown?" He took a sip from his coffee, as if reactors overheating was no more concerning than a burnt piece of toast. The crew exchanged nervous glances. Vorak cleared his throat. We have a catastrophic system failure. Our protocols—" Jacob waved a hand dismissively. Yeah, where's the reactor core?" Gralvan hesitated. Should I brief you on the protocols?" Jacob grinned lazily, taking another sip. "Nah, I don't do protocols. Just show me where it's broken." The crew stared in disbelief as the human tossed his duffel bag, filled with earth tools, onto the ground. A roll of duct tape poked from the side pocket like a talisman of madness. The alien engineers guided Jacob through the trembling station, showing him the coolant leak, the malfunctioning monitors, and the reactor's rising heat levels. To their horror, he pulled out the duct tape and wrapped it around a cracked coolant pipe. Gralvan gasped. You can't possibly fix it with that." Jacob shrugged. Fixed the space station's oxygen scrubbers with it once. Worked like a charm. Vorak stammered. This isn't Earth. This is a galactic-grade reactor core. Duct tape isn't certified." Jacob knelt by the reactor housing, chewing lazily on the end of a pen. "You know," he muttered, "that's probably why it'll work." The aliens exchanged horrified glances. This human wasn't just reckless. He seemed to relish in ignoring all logic and procedure. As Jacob continued his inspection, alarms blared louder. Gralvan panicked. "We're out of time. The reactor will breach." Jacob yawned, finishing his coffee. "Relax, it's just heat. Heat's only a problem if you panic." He pulled out an old screwdriver and opened the control panel. Wires sparked dangerously. With a casual flick, Jacob ripped out several components, leaving the aliens in stunned silence. "Why would you do that?" Vorak whispered, horrified. "Overcomplicated system," Jacob muttered. "You need this one wire to bypass all the nonsense, trust me." He twisted 2 wires together with his bare hands, slapped a strip of duct tape over them, and leaned back with a satisfied grin. "There, should hold." The reactor's hum began to stabilize. Lights flickered back to life. Gralvan blinked in disbelief. It's working?" Jacob stretched, setting his empty coffee cup on the nearest console. "Told you." The station trembled again, and Vorak's mandibles clicked anxiously. "But that solution wasn't in any of our manuals." Jacob smirked. "That's the thing about humans, Captain. We don't need manuals. We just figure things out as we go." The crew of alien engineers stood silently, grappling with a concept entirely foreign to them: improvisation. Everything they knew about survival and engineering had been turned on its head in a matter of minutes. Gralvan whispered, Maybe protocols are the problem." Vorak shook his head slowly, struggling with the thought. "Impossible. Or maybe." Jacob slapped a friendly hand on the captain's shoulder. "See, you're getting it." Captain Vorak thought he had prepared for everything: system breakdowns, interstellar crises, even theoretical anomalies. But nothing prepared him for the experience of working alongside a human. Jacob Carter inspected the reactor's cooling unit while the alien engineers watched, their mandibles clicking nervously. Gralvan took a step forward. "Are you sure that duct tape is appropriate for this situation?" Jacob grinned as he applied another strip. "Yep, you'd be surprised how much you can fix with this stuff." He patted the pipe. "There, good as new." Captain Vorak's third eye twitched uncontrollably. "New? That pipe was glowing." "It stopped glowing," Jacob pointed out, cheerfully slapping dust off his hands. "Mission accomplished." Gralvan leaned in close to Vorak, whispering urgently, "Captain, we should evacuate the station immediately before his solutions cause a cascade failure." Jacob interrupted them, pulling a thermos of coffee from his bag. "Relax, the reactor's stable. You guys just overcomplicate everything. Try simplifying." He took a long sip of coffee, looking around at the frazzled alien crew. "What's next?" The alien engineers continued to whisper nervously among themselves. They had expected the human to use specialized tools, to recite technical schematics, anything but coffee and duct tape. "I heard they survive on caffeine and spite," whispered one technician. Vorak silenced the crew with a wave of his claw. "We must focus. This human might be our last chance." Jacob, overhearing, grinned. "You guys talk about humans like we're cryptids or something." Gralvan blinked. "What is a cryptid?" Jacob chuckled. "Never mind, just think of it this way. If it's broken, humans fix it. If it's dangerous, we run toward it. Simple." Gralvan paled. "You run toward danger?" Jacob gave a casual shrug. "If it needs fixing." The aliens exchanged horrified glances. They weren't sure if the human was a genius or completely insane. Vorak nervously addressed the human. "The reactor is stable, for now, but the air filtration system is failing on Deck 5. We'll need to perform a full shutdown." Jacob shook his head. "Nah, No time for a full shutdown. Just reroute the airflow. Easy. Vorak's antennae twitched. That would void every safety protocol we have. Jacob laughed. Protocols are suggestions, Captain. He pulled a multi-tool from his pocket and opened the ventilation panel. With practiced ease, he began rerouting cables, muttering under his breath. Y'all make things so complicated. Gralvan stared in disbelief. You can't just move air ducts around like that. Jacob grinned. Sure I can. Look. He twisted a valve. Done. Air's flowing just fine now. The hum of the ventilation system returned, stabilizing the station's oxygen levels. The aliens gawked, completely bewildered. Just as they began to relax, another alarm blared. Vorak nearly jumped out of his exoskeleton. What now? Gralvan checked the console in a panic. The coolant system is overloading again. Jacob glanced at the screen, completely unfazed. Guess I missed a valve. No big deal. Gralvan shrieked. No big deal? The reactor could... Jacob cut him off with a wave of his hand. Chill out, I've got this. To the crew's horror, Jacob pulled a wrench from his bag, twisted a random bolt, and slapped another piece of duct tape onto the pipe. There we go. The reactor's temperature dropped instantly. How did you know that would work? Gralvan stammered. Jacob winked. Didn't, just felt right. Vorak clutched his chest, as though physically pained by the human's reckless confidence. You make decisions based on feelings? Jacob smiled. Welcome to humanity. The alien engineers huddled together, whispering furiously. He's not following any protocols. And yet it's working, Gralvan muttered, stunned. Vorak watched in disbelief as Jacob leaned casually against the reactor, sipping from his thermos, completely unfazed by the alarms and flashing hazard lights. The captain's mandibles clicked in frustration. This makes no sense, Vorak whispered. Why does chaos work for him? Jacob overheard and gave a lazy grin. Chaos is just another problem to solve, Captain. You just gotta roll with it. The alien crew stared at him, minds reeling. Everything they thought they knew about survival was being turned upside down. Just as the aliens began processing the madness, Jacob reached into his bag and pulled out an old, scuffed roll of duct tape. Y'all ever use this stuff? The aliens recoiled in horror. That is not a certified repair material. Jacob chuckled. Maybe not certified, but it works. Gralvan shook his head. I don't understand. Why use something so primitive? Jacob grinned. Because it's simple, and sometimes simple is better. He tossed the roll to Vorak, who fumbled with it awkwardly, staring at it like it was a dangerous artifact. As the crew tried to make sense of everything, Jacob packed up his tools. Well, Captain, I think that'll do it. Reactor's good, air's flowing, and the station won't blow up. Vorak blinked. You fixed everything? Jacob gave a casual salute. Yep, see? No need to panic. The crew stood in stunned silence as Jacob slung his duffel bag over his shoulder. You guys really gotta learn to relax. You're too uptight. Gralvan whispered to Vorak. Captain, what if we've been doing everything wrong? Vorak stared after the human, lost in thought. For the first time in his life, he felt doubt. Just when the alien crew thought things couldn't get any stranger, the universe reminded them that things could always get worse, especially with a human on board. Problems didn't just overlap. They exploded in every direction, leaving nothing but chaos in their wake. And somehow, impossibly, the humans seemed to enjoy it. The control room was finally settling down when another deafening alarm echoed through the station. Vorak's antenna twitched violently. What now? Gralvan scrambled to the console, his scales paling. It's the core coolant regulators. They're stuck in feedback loops. Didn't we fix those? Vorak shouted. We did, Gralvan wailed. But now the control circuits are stuck because, oh stars, the duct tape is jamming the valves. Jacob, sipping his coffee, glanced over casually. Guess I overdid it on the tape. Vorak's mandibles clacked furiously. You guess? Without missing a beat, Jacob slung his duffel bag over his shoulder and said, No big deal. We'll just work around it. Jacob headed toward the control circuits, whistling a jaunty earth tune. Gralvan chased after him, practically in tears. There's no time to work around it. We have to shut down the reactor before it... Before Gralvan could finish, another explosion rocked the station. Fire suppression systems kicked in, dousing the entire deck with thick foam. Vorak wiped foam from his face, antennae vibrating with rage. "Why is everything on fire?" Jacob shrugged, unaffected by the chaos. "Probably a faulty relay. Relax, Captain, it's just fire. It'll burn itself out." Gralvan grabbed the human by the shoulder. "Fire doesn't burn itself out. We have protocols." Jacob winked. "Yeah, but protocols take too long. Let's just reroute the power." As the alarms blared louder, Vorak barked orders. "Initiate full system lockdown. All power to containment fields." Jacob shook his head. "That's just going to make things worse." "How could it possibly get worse?" Vorak demanded. Jacob grinned, pulling out a pair of pliers and a flashlight. "Watch this." Ignoring every warning on the console, Jacob ripped open a side panel and began rerouting power cables by hand. Sparks flew, and the lights flickered dangerously. "What are you doing?" Vorak shrieked. "Shortcut," Jacob muttered, twisting wires together and slapping more duct tape on them. The alarms went silent. Gralvan stared in disbelief. "You turned off the alarms?" Jacob grinned. "Yep, annoying, aren't they?" Just as the crew began to process the madness, another crisis unfolded. This time, the oxygen scrubbers failed on Deck 7. Gralvan scrambled to bring the life support system back online, only to discover that Jacob had rewired the entire ventilation system. "Why?" Gralvan wailed. "Did you connect the scrubbers to the coffee machine?" Jacob gave him a cheerful grin. "Because it needed power, and the coffee machine was free." Gralvan looked ready to faint. You rerouted life support through a beverage dispenser." Jacob patted him on the back. "You're welcome." The alien crew tried their best to adapt to the humans' methods, but it felt like trying to navigate a black hole without thrusters. Every time Jacob solved one problem, two more seemed to pop up, each more absurd than the last. Vorak groaned, rubbing his temples. "How do humans survive their own solutions?" Jacob took another sip of coffee. "We don't. We just get lucky." Gralvan whispered in awe. Is luck a strategy for them?" Vorak stared at the human, horrified. "It must be. It's the only explanation." Just as the crew thought they had things under control, the worst possible alert flashed on every console. The reactor core's containment field was destabilizing. Gralvan shouted, "The reactor's going critical. We're out of time." Vorak turned to Jacob, panicked. "What do we do?" Jacob grinned, pulling a roll of duct tape from his bag. "We improvise." The crew watched in stunned silence as Jacob calmly walked over to the reactor, cracked open the containment panel, and began applying duct tape to the exposed conduits. Gralvan gasped. You can't stabilize a reactor with duct tape," Jacob whistled as he worked. "Sure I can. Duct tape's magic." Jacob slapped the last strip of tape on the reactor, then gave it a confident tap. "There, all fixed." The reactor's hum returned to a steady rhythm, and the containment field flickered back to life. For a brief moment, everything seemed fine. Vorak blinked in disbelief. It worked?" Jacob gave a casual thumbs up. "Told you." The crew sighed in collective relief, until another alarm blared, louder than ever. Gralvan checked the console, his voice trembling. "Captain, the reactor core is overloading again." Vorak's antennae drooped. "What? How?" Jacob rubbed the back of his neck. "Oh, yeah, duct tape's only a temporary fix." The alien stared at him in stunned silence. "Temporary?" Jacob grinned sheepishly. "Guess we'll have to try something else." With the reactor moments away from meltdown, Jacob turned to the crew. "All right, guys. We've got 5 minutes to stop this thing from blowing us all to kingdom come. Any ideas?" The aliens gaped at him. "You're asking us?" Jacob shrugged. "Yeah, teamwork, right?" For the first time, the alien engineers hesitated, then nodded. Gralvan pulled up schematics while Vorak adjusted power levels. They began working alongside Jacob, combining their advanced technology with the humans' reckless ingenuity. As the reactor's heat levels peaked, Jacob and the aliens threw everything they had into stabilizing it, twisting wires, bypassing circuits, and of course, slapping on more duct tape. With just seconds to spare, the reactor finally cooled and the alarms went silent. The crew stared at the reactor, panting from exhaustion. It's stable," Gralvan whispered in disbelief. Jacob grinned, wiping sweat from his brow. "Told you, teamwork." As the chaos settled, Vorak looked at Jacob with newfound respect. I think I understand now. Jacob smiled. Yeah, what's that? Vorak sighed. You humans. You don't survive because of luck. You survive because you embrace chaos. Jacob gave him a playful wink. Welcome to humanity, Captain. With the reactor stabilized and the immediate crises resolved, the crew of the Zaltara thought the worst was over. But the real challenge lay not in fixing their systems. It lay in reconciling everything they thought they knew with the sheer madness of what they had witnessed. For aliens who lived by order and logic, witnessing humanity's reckless brilliance left them grappling with existential questions they had never considered before. In the dim silence of the control room, Captain Vorak sat with his head in his claws. Around him, the alien engineers slowly gathered, exhausted and stunned, exchanging glances as if emerging from a shared fever dream. Gralvan whispered, He just did things and they worked. Vorak nodded wearily. No calculations, no protocols, just duct tape and coffee. The crew was silent, as if trying to understand an entirely new philosophy. Gralvan scratched his chin nervously. Captain, do you think the humans know what they're doing? Vorak sighed deeply. I think they know just enough to pretend they don't. The room fell into uneasy silence again. The crew gathered in the station's break room, still flickering slightly from Jacob's earlier rewiring, to process what they had experienced. For a civilization built on careful procedures, trying to grasp humanity's chaotic problem-solving felt like trying to drink from a collapsing star. Gralvan leaned on the table, his eyes hollow with disbelief. What if everything we know is wrong? What if survival isn't about control, but about accepting the chaos? Another officer muttered nervously. That sounds like madness. Vorak rubbed his temples. Or perhaps it's evolution. Humans survive because they adapt to whatever the universe throws at them. They thrive in situations where we falter. Gralvan shivered. It's terrifying. Vorak nodded grimly. Yes, it is. While the aliens wrestled with existential doubt, Jacob strolled back into the room, looking utterly relaxed, his coffee cup refilled. So, you guys doing okay? The alien crew blinked at him, overwhelmed. Gralvan whispered to Vorak, Captain, it speaks to us so casually, as if nothing has happened. Jacob grinned. Of course nothing happened. Just a regular Tuesday. Vorak shook his head in disbelief. You have no idea what you've done to us. Jacob clapped him on the back, nearly knocking him over. Relax, Captain. You'll get used to it. Chaos is fun once you stop worrying about it. Vorak stared at the human, wondering if this was some form of psychological warfare. And yet, something about Jacob's carefree attitude was strangely comforting. In the days that followed, the crew of the Zaltara found themselves changed. Where once they had relied on rigid procedures, they now began experimenting with smaller acts of improvisation. Gralvan rerouted a non-critical ventilation shaft without submitting a formal request. A technician bypassed a power circuit just to see if it would work, and Vorak did the unthinkable. He drank coffee. It's not terrible, he muttered, though no one dared say anything about the new twitch in his antennae. Bit by bit, the alien crew found themselves embracing tiny fragments of the human philosophy. When all else fails, wing it. Late one night, as the station hummed quietly in the aftermath of its near catastrophe, Vorak sat alone on the observation deck, staring into the stars. Gralvan joined him, settling into the chair beside him. Do you think we'll ever understand them? Gralvan asked quietly. Vorak shook his head. No, and perhaps that's their greatest strength. The two aliens sat in reflective silence, watching as the stars drifted across the blackness of space. Captain, Gralvan whispered, what if humans represent something we can't predict? What if they're not just a species, but a force of nature? Vorak rubbed his mandibles thoughtfully. Then the rest of the galaxy needs to prepare, because once you encounter a human, nothing will ever make sense again. Gralvan exhaled slowly. And yet, I think I'm okay with that. Vorak nodded. So am I. Jacob wandered back onto the deck, carrying his thermos and looking content. So, now that the crisis is over, you guys gonna relax a little? Vorak gave him a tired smile. We're working on it. Jacob grinned. Good, that's the secret to life, Captain. Just roll with it. And when everything falls apart, he held up the roll of duct tape. This baby's got you covered. Vorak stared at the tape, feeling oddly comforted by its presence. As Jacob prepared to leave the station, the crew gathered to bid him farewell. Vorak extended a claw in formal farewell. Thank you for everything, though I doubt we'll ever fully comprehend your methods. Jacob shook his hand warmly. Hey, that's the fun part. Life's no fun if it always makes sense. The crew watched as the human boarded his shuttle, whistling an Earth tune. As the hatch closed and the ship prepared to launch, Jacob gave them a final wave. Remember, if all else fails, duct tape. The aliens nodded solemnly, committing the phrase to memory. As the human's shuttle disappeared into the void, the crew returned to their posts, feeling different. The station hummed with newfound life, not because every system was perfect, but because they now knew that perfection wasn't necessary. Gralvan leaned toward Vorak as they walked back to the control room. What do we do if something goes wrong again? Vorak smiled faintly. We adapt, we improvise, and we keep some duct tape nearby. Gralvan chuckled softly. The galaxy will never understand us after this. Vorak's antennae twitched with amusement. Good. Just when it seemed like everything had finally settled, the galaxy reminded the crew of Zaltara that fate, like humans, is unpredictable. And it was only through the most absurd, reckless teamwork imaginable that they stood any chance of survival. As the crew relaxed into their newfound acceptance of chaos, the station's control room suddenly lit up with flashing red lights. Another reactor surge, this one more severe, sent shudders throughout the station's hull. Vorak sprang to his feet. What is it now? Gralvan frantically scanned the readings. The containment field, it's destabilizing again. This time it's spreading to the reactor's core. We won't survive a breach. Before Vorak could respond, the alarm blared louder, accompanied by a terrifying alert. Critical containment failure imminent. Jacob strolled back into the room, munching on a snack bar. What's all the fuss this time? Gralvan shouted. The reactor's core is collapsing. If it breaches... Jacob held up a hand. Yeah, I got it. Big boom, don't worry. Vorak threw up his claws. How can you possibly say that? This is catastrophic. Jacob grinned. Relax, Captain. I've got one last trick up my sleeve. The alien engineers stared at Jacob, horrified but desperate. What trick? Gralvan asked nervously. Jacob set his coffee cup on the console, clapped his hands together, and smiled. We're gonna vent the reactor core, blow off the extra energy. Vorak recoiled in disbelief. That is insane. If the vent fails, the entire station will collapse. Jacob shrugged. Only if it fails. So we just make sure it doesn't. Gralvan whispered. We don't have time to follow protocols. Jacob grinned, pulling out a new roll of duct tape. Exactly. So we improvise. This time, the alien crew didn't argue. They rushed to follow Jacob's lead, working together in the most chaotic way possible. Gralvan and the technicians rerouted power flows, while Vorak organized the manual venting sequence. Jacob moved between them, slapping duct tape on every loose panel and exposed wire. All right, Captain, ready to blow this thing? Jacob asked with a grin. Vorak clutched the console nervously. This feels like madness. Jacob slapped him on the back. That's the spirit. The crew initiated the manual vent sequence, but it was slow, far too slow. Alarms shrieked as pressure levels skyrocketed. Captain, the reactor is minutes from critical failure, Gralvan shouted, panic edging into his voice. Jacob grabbed a nearby panel, yanked it off the wall, and exposed the primary vent controls. There's our problem. Without hesitation, Jacob reached into the tangled mess of wires and circuits. Sparks flew as he twisted the controls manually. Come on, baby, hold together, he muttered. Vorak clutched the console, watching as the vent timer ticked down. We'll never make it in time, Jacob grinned. Sure we will. As the pressure in the reactor hit dangerous levels, the main vent controls jammed. It's stuck, Gralvan wailed. Jacob didn't miss a beat. Guess it's time for Plan B. What's Plan B? Vorak demanded. Jacob pulled out his last strip of duct tape. We pry open the vent and tape it in place. Vorak stared at him in disbelief. That cannot work. Jacob gave him a wink. That's quitter talk. With Gralvan and Jacob working together, they forced the vent hatch open. Vorak watched in stunned disbelief as Jacob slapped the duct tape over the jammed release valve. "All right, Captain," Jacob said. "Time to hit the switch." Vorak hesitated for only a moment, then gave the order. "Activate the vent." The crew scrambled as the station shuddered violently. With a deafening roar, the reactor vented its excess energy into space in a brilliant cascade of light. For a terrifying moment, everything shook, as if the entire station would tear apart. And then, silence. The alarms went quiet. The reactor's hum returned to a steady rhythm. The containment field held. Gralvan stared at the readings in disbelief. It worked. Vorak collapsed into his chair, speechless. "We survived?" Jacob gave a victorious fist pump. "Told you, duct tape saves the day." The alien crew exchanged stunned glances, too exhausted to argue. As the tension eased, Vorak turned to Jacob, shaking his head in disbelief. "You are unlike any creature I've ever encountered." Jacob chuckled. "I get that a lot." Gralvan muttered, "I can't believe it. We saved the station with coffee, duct tape, and madness." Jacob grinned. "Welcome to the human way, fellas." With the crisis averted, the crew of the Zaltara found themselves strangely content. For the first time, they embraced the chaos, knowing that sometimes the only way forward was to improvise. Vorak patted Jacob on the back. "You may have just saved this station and taught us something we never expected to learn." Jacob gave a casual shrug. "Hey, all in a day's work." As the crew finished repairs, Gralvan approached Vorak, still processing what they had experienced. "Captain, do you think we'll ever be the same?" Vorak shook his head with a smile. "No, but I think that's a good thing." Jacob gave them a final salute as he headed for the airlock. "Remember, if all else fails," Vorak finished the sentence with a grin. "Use duct tape." Jacob winked. "Now you're getting it." The crisis had passed, the station was stable, and life returned to something resembling normal. But for the crew of the Zaltara, normal would never quite mean the same thing again. Their encounter with Jacob, the reckless, coffee-fueled human engineer, had changed them, in ways they were only beginning to understand. Captain Vorak stood silently in the observation deck, staring out at the expanse of stars beyond the station. The hum of the reactor, now stable, provided a steady rhythm in the background. He couldn't help but reflect on how close they had come to disaster, and how, against all odds, a human had saved them. Gralvan joined him, holding a freshly printed manual in his claws. "Captain, I've added an unconventional section to the protocols." Vorak raised an antenna. "Oh?" Gralvan flipped the pages, showing a new entry. "Emergency contingency. When in doubt, improvise." The captain gave a rare chuckle. "I never thought I'd see the day." As the crew went about their duties, there was an undeniable shift in their behavior. Procedures were still followed, but they were no longer prisoners to them. Tiny acts of improvisation began to surface. Repairs made without filing requests, conversations held without worrying about rank or formality. Even Vorak, the most rigid of them all, found himself growing more relaxed. The shift was small, but significant. Gralvan smiled as he saw the change unfold. "We've become more human, haven't we?" Vorak exhaled slowly, nodding. "Perhaps that's not such a bad thing." In the docking bay, the crew gathered to see Jacob off. His ship hummed quietly, ready to return him to his outpost. The human slung his duffel bag over his shoulder, still looking as relaxed as ever. Vorak extended his claw in a formal gesture. "Thank you, Jacob. I doubt we'll ever fully understand your methods, but you saved us." Jacob shook the captain's claw with a grin. "Hey, no worries, just another day on the job." Gralvan leaned closer, his voice filled with genuine curiosity. "Tell me, Jacob, do humans always live this way, embracing chaos so easily?" Jacob shrugged. "More or less. Life's too short to stress over every little thing. Just roll with it." As the human prepared to leave, Vorak gave him a small salute. "You taught us something valuable, Jacob. Chaos is not the enemy. Fear is." Jacob grinned. "See? Told you. You guys are getting it." Gralvan hesitated for a moment, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a roll of duct tape. "For your journey," he said, offering it to Jacob. Jacob accepted it with a playful wink. "Thanks. Never know when I'll need it." As Jacob's shuttle departed, the crew stood in silence, watching the small ship disappear into the stars. There was a strange weight to the moment, not sadness exactly, but the bittersweet feeling of knowing that they had changed, and that things would never be quite the same again. Gralvan spoke quietly. "Do you think we'll ever see him again?" Vorak smiled softly. "If the universe has a sense of humor, yes." Back on the station, the crew returned to their duties with renewed purpose. They weren't just maintaining systems. They were ready to face whatever came next, armed with a new philosophy: adapt, improvise, and never be afraid to try the impossible. Gralvan tapped a new sign above the control console. It read, "When in doubt, call a human." Vorak chuckled softly. "I suppose we're ready for anything now." Later that evening, the crew gathered in the station's break room. Vorak, much to the amusement of his officers, poured himself a cup of coffee. Gralvan raised his own cup in a toast, to duct tape and chaos. Vorak clinked his cup against Gralvan's with a grin. "And to humans." As the crew shared a rare moment of laughter, the station hummed gently around them, a reminder that no matter what the galaxy threw at them, they were ready to face it. Months passed, and life aboard the Zaltara resumed its usual routine. But something was different now, a subtle shift in perspective, a quiet confidence that no manual could provide. The encounter with the human wasn't just a story they would tell for years to come. It was the beginning of a new way of thinking, one that would ripple across the galaxy in ways none of them could yet imagine. In the Galactic Council archives, the engineers of the Zaltara submitted their final report. It contained detailed data, explanations of reactor stabilization techniques, and one curious addition: emergency contingency. If all else fails, call a human. The council members scoffed at the entry. "Humans," they muttered, shaking their heads. What could they possibly know about advanced systems? But as word spread among the galaxy's engineers, a strange trend began to emerge. Stations and ships across the sector started keeping duct tape in their emergency kits, just in case. Back aboard the Zaltara, Gralvan marveled at how much the station had changed since Jacob's visit. Small things, like the coffee machine being connected to the life support monitor, were no longer seen as flaws. They were reminders of a new mindset. If it works, it works. Vorak sipped his coffee and grinned. "The council will think we've lost our minds." Gralvan shrugged. "Maybe, or maybe we're just ahead of the curve." In the far reaches of space, the human shuttle carrying Jacob drifted toward the next outpost. Jacob reclined in his seat, whistling softly as he flipped through a list of new repair requests. More stations were calling for human engineers. Word was spreading. He grinned. "Looks like I'm going to be busy." Just as Jacob's shuttle prepared to dock at the next station, a garbled message came through the comms. "Unknown anomaly detected, requesting immediate assistance." Jacob rolled his eyes and chuckled. Of course, it's always something. He grabbed his duffel bag, making sure his coffee thermos and roll of duct tape were packed. As the shuttle's hatch opened, Jacob grinned. "All right, let's see what kind of mess we've got this time." Back on the Zaltara, the crew shared a quiet moment on the observation deck, gazing out at the stars. Vorak raised his cup in a toast to humans, chaotic, reckless, and impossible. Gralvan smiled. "And to duct tape." Vorak chuckled softly. "Because you never know when you'll need it." The stars shimmered in the distance, a silent reminder that in a universe filled with uncertainty, sometimes the best solution isn't the perfect one. It's the one held together by a little creativity, a lot of caffeine, and duct tape.